Hi, I'm Jesper. I'm a beginner woodworker from Denmark. I'm also a YouTuber who thought I could save some money by doing some DIY in my own house. But I shouldn't have done that, because welcome to A Year in My Life. This story begins in... It all started so innocently. My wife and I had a celebration coming up in May, and in a moment of pure optimism or delusion, we decided, hey, let's host it here at home and save some money, because that always goes well. Since it had been a while since we last painted the living room and the kitchen, we figured a quick refresh would do the trick. Nothing major, just a bit of paint, maybe some minor touch-ups, and then I looked up. We have this rafter ceiling running through both rooms, and it has always annoyed me. It's lower than the rest of the house. It makes the space feel dark and cramped, and worst of all, I've always had this suspicion that it was hiding something. And now that I was actually paying attention to it, I noticed something new. It was sagging. A lot. At first I thought maybe it's just poorly mounted, maybe it's just old. But then my brain quietly reminded me of something else that I have seen over the years. On the first floor there were these gaps between the floorboards and the wall trim, a subtle sign that something maybe isn't right. And of course, did I listen to that voice and decide to leave it alone? No. Instead, I turned to my wife and casually suggested maybe I should take a look behind a few of these boards. And since she didn't immediately scream, "Absolutely not," I took that as a green light, of course, to start ripping down the ceiling. Now, at first I thought this will be quick. I'll just peek behind one board and put it back up if everything looks fine, and I trust it will. Just to be safe, I turned on the camera. You never know when there's a new video popping up. Because also, worst case scenario, it would be a pain, but at least it could be a great video. Well, the first thing I found behind the board was another board, so I kept going. Then I found a hole in the wall, then random layers of insulation, and then in the middle of all that DIY archaeology, I spotted something that made my stomach drop. A broken wheat plaster ceiling with ornamental stucco decorations. Now, I'm not entirely sure what these types of ornate plaster decorations are called in English, but in Danish we call them stuk. I have this exact kind of decoration in my office, which still has its original ceiling from 100 years ago. It's beautiful, it is solid, and it is still in almost perfect shape. And here, hidden above an awful 90s ceiling, was another one, except this one had been smashed to hell. Why? Because some absolute genius from the past decided to remove walls, bash holes into plaster, and slap up a lowered ceiling to cover up the mess. They removed 2 load-bearing walls. Yes, load-bearing. They smashed through a handcrafted ceiling that took actual craftsmanship to make, and they covered it up with the cheapest possible 90s tongue-and-groove panels, a crime against architecture. And now, thanks to them, my ceiling was sinking into my living room. At this point, I had zero choice but to keep going. So I ripped down the rest of the lowered ceiling, exposing more and more of the original structure. And let me tell you, it just kept getting worse. Some of the original rafters were completely rotten. The worst sacking was exactly where the load-bearing walls used to be. Meanwhile, my daughter Julia was working on the interior of the cabin we started last summer. And since she needed insulation for the walls, I figured, well, at least something good can come out of this mess. So I took the old Rockwool insulation from the ceiling and handed it over to her. Full recycling. With the last pieces of the lowered ceiling gone, I could finally see the entire ruined ceiling in all its tragic glory. And the more I looked, the more I realized that this was no longer just a quick renovation. This was a full-on reconstruction. I needed to replace the rotten rafters, fix the insulation, and rebuild the ceiling from scratch. So I relocated the kitchen into my office, which now doubled as a kitchen, living room, and also a workshop, and covered the floor with protective cardboard, because things were about to get messy, I thought. My wife had been researching restoration options, and she found out that there are very few people left who still do handmade stucco ornament work. These experts usually restore castles, which means hiring one would probably cost as much as buying an entirely new house. And the alternative, pre-made ornaments. But those would never fully match the original ones. So after weeks of hoping for a different answer, the truth finally sank in. There was only one option. I had to take the original ceiling down. I knew this was going to be a horrific job, so I sealed off the rest of the house to keep the dust contained, and I covered up electronics to protect them from the inevitable mess. I mentally prepared myself for absolute destruction, and then I did what any reasonable person would do. I tried to hire someone else to do it. I found a guy, he agreed, we set a price, we scheduled a weekend, and then he never showed up. So now there was no escaping it. I grabbed my dust mask, pulled on my gloves, and got to work. So, to recap, I tried to do a quick renovation. I discovered a century-old wood-turret ceiling. I learned that load-bearing walls were removed. I realized my bedroom was slowly sinking into my living room. I was now covered in 100-year-old plaster dust. And it was only February. What could possibly go wrong in... At this point, I had accepted my fate and had called for real help in the shape and form of my friend Jonas, who happens to work as a contractor, a real one. And sure enough, when Jonas arrived on Monday to take a look at the structural work, he took one look at the ceiling and said, "Yeah, this is bad." Jonas pulled down a few lats to reveal some structural beams. We found fully rotted structural beams, and these weren't just any beams. They weren't just 100 years old, they were from a previous house built here in the 1800s. And they were supposed to be holding up my entire second floor. That's right, my bedroom was being supported by two ancient wooden beams that probably should have retired a century ago. And to make things even better, those beams had originally been supported by load-bearing walls that someone had very confidently removed. So now, instead of actual walls, they had left behind two lonely, overworked beams struggling to hold up everything. This was not great news. So Jonas asked the most important question of the day. "Are you still using the upstairs?" And I said, "Yeah, that's our bedroom." Jonas sprints to the car, comes back with steel props and starts jacking up the entire ceiling. So within minutes, my house had suddenly gained a new indoor jungle gym of adjustable steel props holding up the sagging beams and essentially stopping my bedroom from becoming my living room. And just to confirm our suspicions, Jonas managed to jack the ceiling back up by 5 to 10 centimeters. This was definitely the reason it was sagging. With the immediate danger under control, we started cutting out the now retired hand-hewn beams, making space for new supports, and Jonas had a plan. Install steel I-beams to replace the old ones and properly carry the weight of the upper floor. Simple? Yeah, well... Finding someone who could cut custom steel beams to the exact size we needed was easier than expected thanks to Jonas's contacts. Actually installing them was another story. But the guy who cut and delivered the beams was kind enough to stick around and help with lifting them into place. Just getting them into position, that wasn't enough. We also needed to make sure the walls could properly distribute the weight. So another small beam had to be installed inside the wall to support the structure. And at this point I was wondering if we should just start calling this house a rebuild instead of a renovation. Somewhere in the middle of all this, I found myself staring at the mess and thinking, will this ever be a normal living space again? But honestly, I was just incredibly grateful that Jonas and his friends were there. Because if I had done what some of the previous homeowners did, ignore the problem, slap another ceiling on top and call it a day, my bedroom would have eventually crashed into the living room. And as exciting as this sounds for YouTube content, I prefer my sleeping arrangement to remain on the second floor. With the new beams in place and my house no longer threatening to self-destruct, we moved on to the next step, building a level framework for the ceiling. The original ceiling had sagged unevenly over time, so we had to adjust each wooden rafter to compensate. Some sections were higher, some were lower, but by the end we had a solid level base to attach a new ceiling to. And once the grid was in place, I had just enough space to add some insulation. I had been thinking about trying wood fiber insulation for a while, and this seemed like the perfect moment to finally go for it. So I rushed out and bought a stack of it, because I was excited and because I wanted to feel that I was in control of something. And honestly, it was kind of amazing. No etching, no lung-destroying fiberglass dust, great for soundproofing, which is ideal when your bedroom is above the living room. And more environmentally friendly than Rockwool or fiberglass. And it holds its shape over time, so no annoying setting that reduces effectiveness. The only downside is it is so dense and it does not want to be shoved into place. Let's just say there was a lot of pushing, cursing and recutting involved. But by the end of the weekend, the entire ceiling grid was stuffed with insulation and I was feeling pretty good about this last-minute decision. Somewhere in the middle of saving my house from collapse, it hit me. It had been months since I last uploaded a video to my YouTube channel. My camera had been running this whole time, but none of this footage was making it into a video in the near future. So in the rare moments when I wasn't wrestling with insulation or hauling steel beams, I sat down to work on a new video. I started writing the full journey from beginner woodworker to whatever it is that I was doing now. And in the back of my mind, another thought was brewing. By Monday, a huge stack of plasterboards arrived and Jonas showed up again. Bless this man. We spent the next few days lifting and screwing drywall into place, and let me tell you, doing this with a friend is 100 times better than struggling alone. Jonas' strategy was 2 people lifting, 1 person prepping the next board. My original plan was me alone, wrestling plasterboards onto the ceiling with a lift. Safe to say, his way was way better and also way faster. And finally, with the ceiling starting to look like an actual ceiling again, a new reality was settling in. We were getting close. The room still had a million finishing touches left, but after months of destruction, sacking beams, and near house collapse moments, we were finally rebuilding. And just when I thought I could breathe for a second, I looked around and realized, hey, there was still a massive 15 to 20 centimeter gap around the entire ceiling that we needed to fix. Well, at least the house wasn't falling apart anymore. By now I had spent months on renovations, moved my entire kitchen and living room into my office, and not uploaded a single YouTube video in forever. So I decided to do something productive. Instead of finishing the ceiling, boring, I spent an entire weekend recording the voiceover to my new video about my entire journey from beginner to full-time woodworker and YouTuber. Why? Because my audience had probably assumed that I died, because I needed to make some money, and because I needed to remind myself why I started doing this in the first place. Back in the real world, my wife and I had to make a big decision where to celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary in May. Originally, the plan was to host it at home here, but let's be honest, our house was still like a borderline construction site. So when a local winery that also happens to make the wine from our own vineyard's grapes offered to host a party in their wine tasting facilities, we gratefully accepted. Because at this point, throwing a party in a beautiful winery sounded way better than panic renovating a half-finished house. With that settled, we started sending out invitations and pretending that we had everything under control. By May, I had officially hit renovation exhaustion. But there was one bright spot. The video I had been working on for what felt like forever had finally been released. And to my surprise, it actually found an audience. That video, 1.5 hours of my journey from beginner to full-time woodworker, not only did well, but it meant that I could pay the bills and, most importantly, pay Jonas for saving my house from complete collapse. I guess I'm lucky. After months of chaos, it felt surreal to just step away from the construction zone, be surrounded by family and friends, and enjoy an evening where the biggest decision was what wine to drink next. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't thinking about renovation problems, unfinished projects, or how much money I had thrown into the house. I was just there, present and enjoying the moment. And as I looked around at the people who had supported me through this absolute roller coaster of a year, I realized that renovation mess aside, we had actually come pretty far. The house was still standing. The channel was miraculously still going. And somehow, despite everything, I was still mostly sane. Not bad for 3 months of complete chaos. But then came June. With the anniversary celebration behind us and no immediate disasters looming over my head for once, I finally felt like I had some energy to get back to the renovation. There was about a million things still left to do, like putting up the exterior cladding on the cabin with Julia, but one thing in particular had been nagging me, that was the kitchen. Remember when I ripped out the ceiling and in the process also demolished the IKEA range hood? Yeah, I wasn't exactly planning on putting that thing back up because I hate IKEA. It had served its time, let's just say that, and honestly, I never really liked it. I had a new plan. I had found a built-in range hood from Miele, and all I had to do now was just to build a custom cover for it. Simple, right? Yeah. But this wasn't just about installing a range hood. This was the first real step toward building the entire kitchen. That was what I told myself. So while I was cutting and assembling pieces for the range hood, I started thinking about something bigger. About this time last year, I made an update video where I casually mentioned a big wild dream, turning my old barn into something new. Now, this barn isn't just old. It has roots going back to the 1800s. It's kind of beautiful, or it was. It has this traditional structure that's seen generations of use, but it's also falling apart, and it has been badly maintained at least the last 50 years. And instead of letting this rot away, I plan to take it apart and rebuild it as a maker barn. And this will be a place where old school craftsmanship meets modern woodworking. Courses, maker camps and meetups could happen here. Traditional building techniques could be preserved and taught here. And because I put that dream into words, because I said it out loud in a video, things started to happen. People in the comments loved the idea. Some really skilled makers reached out saying they would love to be a part of it. And then something even bigger happened. I was contacted by the Northmen, the Guild of Master Craftsmen in Latvia. They invited me to attend one of the timber framing courses later in the year. That's right, I was going to learn how to build this barn the proper way. And suddenly, this crazy idea wasn't just a dream anymore. There was still plenty of stuff to do. I started fixing the walls with filler and sanding, aka the most boring but necessary steps in renovation. I spent way too much time trying to get an electrician to actually show up. Living room and cabin still needed wiring. And then out of nowhere, Rubio Monaco invited me to Belgium for the Atelier event. August rolled in, and with it came my completely rational belief that I could remodel the kitchen in just 1 month. The plan was simple: tear out the sad, abused IKEA cabinets that had somehow survived our household for years, build new superior cabinets with my own 2 hands, install them effortlessly, enjoy my new kitchen, and sip coffee while admiring my handiwork. Reality check. The IKEA cabinets didn't go down without a fight. They were falling apart, but still somehow too stubborn to remove without a struggle. Let's just say they met a violent end. RIP budget particle board, you will not be missed. With the old cabinets gone, I grabbed my trusty birch plywood and started cutting up pieces for the new ones. Since these would be hidden behind the fancy kitchen hardware, I decided to fully embrace my lazy side and use pocket hole joinery with wood glue, because suffering is optional in this case. At this point I was feeling productive, but then I looked up. Wires just hanging from the ceiling. You see, my original electrician had started the job, then mysteriously vanished. No text, no calls, no sorry I ran off to join the circus. Just gone. Turns out finding a new electrician mid-project is harder than getting front row seats at a Beyoncé concert. So the kitchen was now a battlefield of unfinished cabinets, exposed wiring, and my shattered dreams. I remained optimistic, that means stupid, thinking it's fine, we'll sort it out in... September rolled in, and it was finally time to pack my bags, grab my work boots, and haul myself over to Latvia for something that I had been looking forward to since spring: a hardcore 10-day timber framing course. My excitement level was through the roof, but my confidence level was somewhere in the basement. Because here's the thing, I was about to spend over a week using nothing but hand tools. No power saws, no cordless drills, just axes, chisels, and my questionable upper body strength. And while many of the other participants were professional carpenters or builders, I was just the guy who makes things out of pallet wood on YouTube. No pressure. But as soon as we got started, I remembered why I love this kind of work. It is one thing to watch someone talk on a screen about joinery techniques, and it's a whole other thing to try and actually grab an axe, feel the wood, and carve out a perfect joint with your own hands. There's something incredibly satisfying about working this way. The goal of the course was to take raw logs and turn them into a fully raised timber frame by the end of the 10 days. And in between sweating over chisels and questioning my life choices, I got talking with the guys behind the Northmen who, as it turns out, surprise, are just as obsessed with wood as I am. And that's where the conversation about my woodworking barn began. You know the idea that got me to Latvia in the first place, the reconstruction of my barn? The Northmen liked that idea too. So enter Søren. Søren is a blacksmith, timber framer, and also, unbeknownst to me, an incredible designer, and he was also teaching at the timber framing course. And after hearing about my barn idea, he casually said, "I'll help you design it." And just like that, we were sketching out a full timber frame structure. Now, I could have gone the easy route and just order a steel construction, but I really wanted something from wood, something that would last generations, something built with axes and chisels the way they did 200 years ago. Fresh off the timber framing course and feeling absolutely unstoppable, I came home and immediately harvested grapes. Yep, it was vineyard time again. Remember that winery up the road where we had our anniversary party? Well, we gave them our grapes for their production, and those lovely people invited us to help with the grape harvest in our own vineyard. We had a great day, by the way. So while my kitchen still looked like a construction site, I was out in the fields playing farmer. Priorities non-existent. And just like that, poof, October disappeared and turned into... Somewhere between axing timber in Latvia and crushing grapes, I made a brilliant decision. Let's invite everyone over for Christmas. Because what's the holiday season without some extra stress? Now, the problem was our floors. These were 100-year-old pine floors that had seen a bit of everything. they looked like absolute garbage after the past year of house renovation. So instead of replacing them, which would have made sense, I convinced a guy with a massive sander to come over and fix my mistakes. It did a fantastic job. The floors were now smooth, free of 100 years of grime and ready for a new finish. Enter Rubio Monocoat. They had just launched 20 new wood protection colors and they reached out saying, "Wanna try one?" My response, "Yes, please send help." We picked linen, a nice light grayish color that took away the freshly sanded pine glow and made the space feel more modern. They even came over to apply it, which was a blessing because at this point I was running on fumes. Now we just had to finish the walls, fix the ceilings and figure out why our house still echoed like a medieval cathedral. Easy, right? With Christmas fast approaching, I had one final mission: to fix the horrible acoustics in the living room. The combination of these new floors, the new ceiling and completely empty walls had turned our space into an echo chamber. Not ideal for cozy holiday gatherings. The solution was to design a sound-absorbing feature wall. So I ordered some foam panels, cut up a massive chunk of ash and built 2 giant beams to mount on the wall. But it didn't stop there. No, I went full woodworking nerd and created a stacked firewood installation between the beams. And why did I do this? It absorbs sound like crazy. It looks awesome and I had a ton of firewood laying around. And just like that, the living room was finally starting to feel like a real space again. But wait, there's more. Somehow, amidst all this chaos, I managed to 3D print a minimalist cone lamp, because clearly I'm incapable of resting. And then Christmas arrived. This house that had been a construction zone for a year, was now filled with family, warmth and an absurd amount of food. And as I sat there surrounded by the people who made this journey worthwhile, I realized something. This wasn't just about fixing a house. This was about building something bigger. The dream of a maker barn, a place where people can come together and create and learn, is actually happening. And I am so excited about this. We are actually harvesting the wood for it. If you're wondering where this magical timber is coming from, this is Latvia. Why? Because Latvia is basically a giant forest. Over 50% of the country is covered in trees, and not only that, but their forestry management is actually increasing the tree coverage. Every tree they cut, they plant 2.5 new ones. So no, I am not single-handedly destroying the nature to build my dream barn. In fact, this whole process is being done as sustainably as possible. The timber is being harvested in late February, which is the best time to cut wood if you want it to dry properly and resist rot. This wood will then be milled, cut and shaped into a full timber frame in Latvia before it is being shipped to Denmark for the raising. So I'm celebrating a house that didn't collapse, a year of ridiculous projects, a woodworking channel that is still running somehow, and a woodworking barn that is finally taking shape. And most importantly is to you. Thanks for sticking around, watching and supporting this crazy journey. Now let's see what kind of chaos 2025 will bring.